Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is an ongoing world's finest collaboration between Michael K. Vaughan and myself, in which we combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we have wasted our youths. And since I horned in on this event that was an innocent, minding its own business event on Michael's channel, he gets to pick what we talk about week by week for the four people that watch these comic book videos. And I have a feeling that a reckoning is coming because he's lately been picking things that I would pay to talk about. And that's not usually the case. Something horrible is coming down the line. I don't know what it will be. But in the meantime, maybe Space Truckers or Nightshade or something like Star Brand. But in the meantime, he's picked another winner today. He's picked this. This was a mini-series called Secret Origin, Superman's Secret Origin, written by Jeff Johns and drawn by Gary Frank in, I think, 6 issues, that retells the basic origin story of Superman. And there's a mythic element to that, a mythic heft, a mythic enjoyment to that, to seeing this origin story redone over and over again. And it's all the more poignant, a mythic element, because of one particular figure, and that is John Byrne, the fan-favorite artist and writer John Byrne, famous for his run on the X-Men, who, in the 1980s, for reasons passing understanding, who knew there was this much cocaine in the world, was told by the powers that be at DC Comics that he could redo Superman. So take the work of 60 years of creators much better than you, toss it right out the window, and just revamp this character from the ground up. We don't care. So just take the character and do whatever you want with it. There are some hard, bright lines that you can't cross. Like, for instance, one of Byrne's earlier ideas, which was that Superman's mother survives with him. So you've got a boy and a middle-aged Kryptonian woman who are on Earth together. There had to be some hard, fast lines, but otherwise you can just do whatever you want. And John Byrne, having been liberally infected with the Stan Lee virus, immediately decided that what he would do would be to make Superman pathetic and ordinary. So he drastically decreased Superman's powers and abilities. He made it okay that the planet Krypton dies. There's no tragedy attending to Superman because Krypton really deserved to die. And he changes all of the action into being purely Marvelized type things. He took a wrecking ball to the character. Those of us who'd been Superman fans for 40 years looked at the miniseries, the Man of Steel miniseries, which Michael tells me I have ranted about before on Epic Comic Book Wednesday, so I'll keep it to a minimum this time around. But those of us who'd been lifelong Superman fans, I was appalled by what I was watching. Absolutely appalled. The planet Krypton is a cold, emotionless, icy place, no heroicism at all, that deserves, really, its fate. Superman is sent to Earth not as a baby in a rocket, but as a fetus in a rocket, so that he is born on Earth from a gestation tube. He is a normal kid growing up in Smallville and only becomes Superman when he gets to Metropolis for the first time. Naturally, when I read that revelation in that first issue of Man of Steel, I thought, well, if he was never Superboy, then what about the Legion of Superheroes? What about the character of Superboy? Not some other Superboy, not some clone in a leather jacket, but Superman when he was a boy. The comic book that I read for 35 years and loved, that sold really well for DC. What about that? That's all gone. John Byrne says so that's all gone. And Superman is weaker, and John Byrne changed the origin of his powers and the nature of his powers. John Byrne changed the mythology involved so that Lex Luthor is this balding, overweight business tycoon in Metropolis who sees this hero Superman debut in Metropolis and I guess feels a little bit jealous because he's not the headline anymore, because he's not the biggest man on campus anymore, and so on and so forth down the line. No Superboy, no Krypto the Super Dog, no nothing like that. And as I think I've mentioned many times now in connection with Man of Steel by John Byrne, when I was reading that miniseries, keep in mind, the Superman comics had been canceled. There was no Superman. There was no Superman on the newsstands at all. Action Comics had stopped its run. Superman, World's Finest, all that had stopped so they could revamp the character and start everything up again with first issues. while Man of Steel, the miniseries, was unspooling, even then, while the ink was still wet on the pages, all I could think was, DC Comics is going to walk back every element of this. Every single thing in this miniseries. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time of this not Superman being Superman in order for us to get Superman back to being Superman. But it is going to happen. This is not going to stay the character. It is going to happen. And gradually, slowly, it did. And then DC Comics did it again with something called the New 52, where suddenly there's a different Superman with a Nehru collar and piping all over his costume, who is a distant Dr. Manhattan-style jerk. And I remember buying those first issues and thinking, sooner or later, DC Comics is going to walk all of this back. And why? Why was I sure of that? Well, I was sure of that because of the creative genius of two people, the two people who created Superman. And you're going to think that I mean Joe Siegel and Jerry Schuster, the two teenage boys from Ohio who made Superman, but I'm not talking about them at all. I'm talking about the two men, creative geniuses, who made Superman. And those two men are Julie Schwartz and Mort Weisinger, whose names you don't know. Unless you're a comic book fan of long-standing, you won't know their names. But they made Superman. And they invested this character with several hallmarks. Okay? They pounded those hallmarks deep into the soil of this character. So deep that the incoming and outgoing tides of people like John Byrne or anybody don't matter. There are several of those pylons for Superman. One, believe it or not, as silly as it seems to you people who aren't comic book fans, is the spit curl. No spit curl, no Superman. Another is the costume. Another is the powers. Okay? You hit Superman with a howitzer, he sneezes. He doesn't go flying across the county and maybe recover a bit. Oh, man. Oh, God. No. He's Superman. Nothing you can do to him is going to hurt him. That's the whole point of the character, is that you have to come up with other ways to tell your story. There's lots of drama in this character, but not those. That is not the drama. There are several other pylons that were put in place by Julie Schwartz and Mort Weisinger. You cannot ignore them. They are part of this character. One is that he was a costumed adventurer as a teenager. There was a character named Superboy. Whether you call him that or not, whether DC Comics is in any kind of legal trouble for using the character, they can use the name Superboy. But it doesn't look like they legally can have a series of adventures of Clark Kent as Superboy. That doesn't seem to be possible anymore. They abandoned that in a flurry of litigation decades ago, and it doesn't appear to me that they've ever gone back. So I'm never going to get my favorite superhero. My favorite superhero is Superboy and his dog. A muscular teenager in skin-tight leotard fighting crime in the American Midwest. I'm never going to get that anymore. Fortunately, there are hundreds of issues of that character that are out there that you can get. And they were great. They're all great. Superboy, not a clone or Superman's gay son or whatever, but the adventures of Superman when he was a boy. Clark Kent in Smallville. That comic book in Superboy and Adventure Comics sold like crazy. There were many months in the late 50s and early 60s, okay, maybe the 50s and maybe the early 60s, where some of those Superboy things were routinely outselling Superman. From the introduction of the character of Superboy straight through for decades, he was a major figure in the DC Comics landscape. So he is a major pylon for this character. Superman was first Superboy. And Superboy went 1,000 years into the future on a regular basis to have adventures with the Legion of Superheroes who were inspired by his example in their history books. That is part of the Superman mythos. Part of the Superman mythos is that he learned a large amount of what it is to be a superhero as a teenager in the company of other superheroes. The Justice League was not his first super team. You don't like that as a writer? Find some other character to write. But don't go to DC Comics with a ton of cocaine and say, I'd like to change that. I'd like to get that out of the character's storyline. No, don't do that. No. Also, another pylon is that in those Smallville years, there is no Bruce Wayne. He appears, but he's not a regular character. There is no Lois Lane. Superman hasn't met her yet. There's Lana Lang, who is his high school sweetheart. She does not know that Superboy is Clark Kent. The only person in Metropolis, aside from the Kents and Crypto, who knows that is Pete Ross, Clark Kent's friend, who stumbles upon his secret and isn't allowed to remember it, even though there are memory tricks played on every character in every issue. Somehow Pete Ross manages to hold on to that awareness. Lana Lang never figures it out, even though they apparently grew up together. That's another pylon, is that there's a cast of characters for Smallville that does not necessarily overlap with the cast of characters in Metropolis. One of the really neat things about Superman, in one of the few ways that it reflects the real world, is that your childhood sweetheart, your high school girlfriend, is often not the love of your life. It is an amazing thing when it's done well, and some writers have done it really well. It is an amazing thing for Clark Kent as a young man to still be floating along on the idea of a high school student, which is that sooner or later Lana and I will grow up and get married. It's an amazing moment when the adult Clark Kent realizes that he has fallen unbelievably, eternally in love with someone else. With a woman he didn't know growing up, the woman he only meets as an adult. That's an amazing thing, and plenty of writers have done that really well. But Lana Lang has to be there. And Pete Ross and the whole gang in Smallville has to be there. Clark Kent has to hide his identity. His parents tell him to hide his identity, which means not only wearing a costume in order to draw attention to the costume and away from his face, but also that Clark Kent must act meek. He must not be involved in, for instance, he must not be a football star, as John Byrne makes him. John Byrne makes him a football star. This character who can lift a battleship out of its berth is somehow a football star and does not leave behind a field full of dead bodies. Also, John Byrne tells us that in Man of Steel that his character emits an aura around his body that makes his clothing invulnerable. So in John Byrne's Superman, the costume is not manufactured by the blankets that were in the rocket that brought the baby Kal-El to Earth, as it is in the genuine origin story. But instead, it's just any old costume, and when it's worn next to Superman's skin, it's invulnerable. Byrne comes up with that idea. I'm sure he thought that it was really clever. And you tell me, when you go to a high school football game and it's late autumn and there's mud everywhere and people are coming off the field grimed from head to toe, are you going to notice if one member of the team has no dirt on him at all? You kind of are. Yeah. Anyway. The meek and mild Clark Kent persona is part of the mythos that was pounded into place by Julie Schwartz and Mort Weisinger. You have to respect it. Another element of that mythos that has to be in place, in addition to Superdog, in addition to the Legion of Superheroes, another element of that mythos that has to be in place is that Clark Kent and Lex Luthor meet in Smallville. They shared their teenage years together. They were young men together. They have a long history. Whether you like it or not, whether John Byrne didn't like that. He thought, oh, what are the odds that everything is happening is centered on Smallville? What are the odds? Lana Lang, sure, I can understand. The Kents, sure, I can understand. But Lex Luthor? No. They didn't know each other as kids. You don't get to change that. Better writers than you made it so you don't get to change it. When I was seeing John Byrne take a wrecking ball to all of those central pylons of the character, I was thinking sooner or later, DC Comics is going to bring it all back to these basics. They have to. They're part of the character. And this miniseries does that more than any other. This is as close as you can get to a traditional retelling of Superman's origin, much closer than I thought it would be. This has it has some sacrilege. Okay? Jor-El does not have a beard. Okay? That is not what Jor-El looked like. He doesn't look like an old John Schneider. That's not what he looks like. Artistic license notwithstanding, that's not what he looks like. He looks like what he looked like in the Julie Schwartz and Mort Weisinger era. But I'm willing to accept it as a minor variation. But here in this issue, in the very first issue, we get Lex Luthor, who is in Smallville. Now, this miniseries is not going to do anything as ridiculous as was done in the Schwartz and Weisinger era, where Lex Luthor, a lab experiment goes wrong and it causes all his hair to fall out, and that sets him on an eternal quest for vengeance against Superboy. That is a little silly. That could certainly stand to be changed, and nobody's putting a whole lot of weight on that. Instead, Jeff Johns, who's a writer that I don't particularly like, he invests this storyline with a tremendous amount of heart. It's really, really well done. For instance, we get a young Clark Kent playing football with a young Pete Ross, and Clark smashes his arm to pieces. And not only does Clark smash his arm, but Clark can see the damage that he's caused. He can use his X-ray vision to see. Now, there is a minor variation in this story because Lana Lang wants to know what's wrong with him, and they recall together how when they were little kids in a field, Clark saved her from the blades of a combine and was not hurt at all. So Lana kind of knows in this comic that there's something inhuman about Clark Kent, which would not be true. She also sees him use heat vision for the first time. That is not true from the Weisinger era, where she doesn't know. She has no idea. But there are wonderful, touching moments. The hologram of Jor-El and Lara talks to young Clark Kent, and his foster parents are watching. Clark Kent runs into the field, and he's crying. And when his father catches up with him in the field, Clark says, "I don't want to be different. I want to be Clark Kent. I want to be your son." And Pa Kent says, he holds him, he says, "Clark," and then we get this wonderful scene, "You are my son." How wonderful. That is fantastic. That is the way you respectfully do a retelling of Superman's origin. That's the way to do it respectfully, as opposed to taking a wrecking ball to everything. It's in these early issues that young Clark Kent learns that he actually has the ability to fly. But it was only in the third issue of Secret Origin that I plotzed, that I lost it. We have this young teenage Clark Kent, and he doesn't know what he's doing. He knows that he has all these powers, and his parents decide that he should wear a costume. For the first time in 35 years, I got to see Superboy in a comic book. Not some other Superboy, but my Superboy, the real Superboy, Clark Kent, when he was a teenager, wearing the costume of Superman. And at the end of this issue, I plotzed, because that was so wonderful for me to see. And oh my God, my plotzing wasn't done. I hadn't known from plotzing, because in the next issue, Superboy meets the Legion of Superheroes. There we've seen them in my library tour: Saturn Girl, Lightning Lad, Cosmic Boy, the old Legion headquarters. I had waited forever to see this. DC fans of a certain vintage had been told that this did not ever happen. It was just removed from continuity. Well, this miniseries brought it back. I don't know how canonical this is, but this miniseries brought back the fact that Superboy meets the Legion of Superheroes. He goes to the future with them. They take him in a time bubble to Metropolis, far in the future. I was grinning from ear to ear when I was reading this issue, just grinning from ear to ear, seeing the Legion in action, and watching Superboy give them their motto, "Long live the Legion." Just incredible. And the issue leaves it wide open. The issue leaves open the fact that he will continue to visit with them. And right as that issue is ending, as if that wasn't bad enough, I remember, I still have this individual issue somewhere. I don't think I have any of the others. But the issue in which the Legion of Superheroes is brought back with Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes is brought back, I was reading that, the adventures that he's having with them, and I was thinking, I have died and gone to comic book heaven. This is incredible. And the issue wasn't done with me, because the Legion, they deposit Superboy back on Earth, they go back to the 30th century, and then the Kent family farm starts to shake because a rocket is coming to Earth. Superboy has to stop it from doing any more damage. It lands on the ground, and the final panel, we don't actually open it and see it, but it's Crypto the Superdog who is in this rocket. We hear him bark. Steve was well pleased. Very, very well pleased. Then the whole story jumps forward to Clark Kent going to Metropolis. And here's the thing that most people noticed about this miniseries, which is that the artist, Gary Frank, decides to draw Clark Kent and Superman as Christopher Reeve. I guess because he was impressed by the movie when he was young. He decides to give us the Christopher Reeve Superman, complete with the helicopter scene from Superman the Motion Picture that is so incredible. That is one of my favorite sequences in any movie at all. is that sequence with Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder in the first Superman movie. We get that, and we get Superman adventures in Smallville. And he is very much, let me get you another picture here. He is very much Christopher Reeve throughout. See, there you go. You've got that is an artistic choice on Gary Frank's part. It didn't really bother me all that much. He's not really my Superman. My Superman is from a generation earlier, but I was okay with it. The only problem that I have with Gary Frank's art is, you can see, he has a real good, let me show you, he has a real good sense of panel dramatics. He's really good with that. The only problem that I have with him is his fetish. Gary Frank as an artist has a fetish for teeth. And it's so persistent that I can't imagine that no one has told him. I can't imagine that no one has pointed it out to him. But he still persists to this day, as far as I know. And that is, he draws teeth. He tries to draw them accurately in all of his characters. And boy, oh boy, does it show. You've got these ferrety teeth in all of his characters. I mean, it's just so distracting. I mean, it's right there on the cover. Look at that. Look at that. Look at this right here. That is just so distracting. I only think about that. See, no matter where you turn, any page, and you get this fetish with real life dentist visit teeth. Which is, Jack Kirby had it right when he was drawing teeth in comic book characters, which is don't do it. Look at this. Teeth. Ew, it's disgusting. But this goes on here. We get Lex Luthor, who is a prominent Metropolis businessman, but he's also a supervillain, an out-and-out supervillain. He's not the face of corporate greed like he is in the Man of Steel. Instead, he is an outright supervillain. He is a bad guy who is behind a lot of other bad guys. I wonder if I have a good visual of that. Yeah. Luthor he's a bad guy. He is a supervillain, a super genius, a maniac, all that sort of stuff. He's relatively back to where he should be in the mythos. In fact, almost everything is relatively back to where it should be in the mythos here. The two villains that we get in this miniseries are carefully chosen. The Parasite is a Superman villain who can drain his energy by touching him. And apparently Superman is not invulnerable. The Parasite is an old villain of his, so it brings out the human side of Superman. He can definitely lose to the Parasite. And the same thing with Metallo, the man with the kryptonite heart, who's another old villain who's, kryptonite is a genuine weakness of Superman. But other than that, this Superman is physically unstoppable. The villains are well chosen because he can't just beat them, to a pulp. They both have signature weaknesses of his. Why the Bean is taking to yawning compulsively when I'm talking on camera. Am I that boring? Don't answer that. But the thing that this miniseries really did for me was give me just an amazing smile on my face, because so many elements of the Julie Schwartz and Mort Weisinger era are returned in one way or another in here. We have sad but heroic Kryptonian parents. We have a loving foster family in Smallville. We have Superman taking on the mantle of the costume and the cape as a boy. We have the Legion of Superheroes. We have an outright villainous Lex Luthor. We have just a whole bunch of things are restored in this miniseries. Now, the only problem with that is that who knows how much of this is still true. DC Comics has been spinning the plate on its own continuity non-stop, literally every summer, for 40 years now. The most diehard fan in the world would not know for complete certainty. Does the Legion of Superheroes, as we've seen it in these issues, does that Legion exist in current DC continuity? Did it ever exist in current DC continuity? I could not tell you. It would take a diehard DC fan to know if they weren't looking it up on Marvel Comics Encyclopedia.com or whatever. And that's a real problem. DC Comics ought to get over that. Fans don't like it. Fans have never liked it. And you don't have any new fans. You only have your older fans. So if you shouldn't consciously do things that they don't like. So set a canonical origin story for all of your characters and leave it that way. Just tell new stories about them. I have no idea if this is canon. There are a couple of other very high-profile Superman origin story miniseries that are out there that I'm sure that Michael K. Vaughan and I will be getting to them, especially since if you watch his channel, you know that he's made a vow to read Superman every day. I watched that video and I thought, well, that's a weird vow to make. And then I remembered, oh wait, normal people don't already do that. I already do read Superman every day. But he is now abandoned the ranks of the normal. He also will be reading Superman every day. And there are lots of great Superman stories out there. There's another very high-profile retelling of the Superman story that we could easily do, but plenty of others too. The main takeaway that I had from this is whether this is canon in DC or not is immaterial to me. It has to be, I guess, in a way, because that's just the way comics are now. Instead, I just have to be grateful for this. I'm grateful for this. I was grateful as the issues were coming out. I was grateful that I saw one more time Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. I was grateful one more time that I got at least the hint of Krypto the Superdog. I was grateful that I saw all these things that I recognize. The Kents in Smallville. A meek Clark Kent at Smallville High. Superboy and his tunnel, his secret tunnel that leads from the outside world to his home so that people don't know who he is, so they don't know his identity. It's true that in this miniseries, Smallville doesn't seem to know that Superboy exists. In the Superboy comics and in Adventure Comics, he's well known in Smallville. He's the hero of Smallville. And, very poignantly, during the run of Superboy and Adventure Comics, he's the only superpowered being in the world. Except for all the superpowered aliens who managed to show up in Smallville. But there are no other heroes. There are no other superheroes. The Superboy world takes place in it's very, very interesting. Its dramatic depths have not been plumbed. Not correctly, not respectfully. That has not happened. And it's amazing. It's a shame that DC Comics appears not to be able to do it. Because that would be great. Imagine if a writer came along who could tell great, poignant stories about high school and the desire to belong. Imagine how much stronger those desires would be if you're not even human, and you know it. Those are great stories that have not yet been told. But sometimes those old Superboy stories and Adventure Comics come close. Sometimes we get a sense of the loneliness of this character. Every time a character shows up on Earth who has superpowers, suddenly Superboy feels a little less lonely. That's the whole point of Krypto the Superdog, is that finally he has someone who can fly through the air, who's bulletproof, just like he is. Anyway, the short form here, after 30 minutes, is that this was a great pick on Mike's part. I am all thumbs up about this. It was wonderful to revisit it. And who knows what we'll do next? Oh, no, I know what we're doing next time. That's right. In a rare burst of foolhardiness, Michael K. Vaughan has already announced that next week we will be returning to the fake comics, we will be returning to Marvel Comics, and we'll be dealing with Winter Soldier. Captain America Winter Soldier. I'm going to have to find those issues here somewhere. I don't know that I have a graphic novel, but plenty to talk about there. So we'll reconvene then. The three of you and us will reconvene then. I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.